talk a little bit about the strop that I use to clean up my tips. They don't get dirty very often because I don't burn really hot. The hotter you burn, the more reason there is for char and residue, resins from the wood, sap, whatever you want to call it. It's in the wood and it will be picked up by your burner tip, depending upon what kind of wood you're using. I use tupelo for the most part. Anyway, when we look close at the tip, you're not seeing a whole lot of, I'm trying to get the light right here, not seeing a whole lot of residue on this particular tip. However, I did want to demonstrate. So this is what's called a wood is good strop. It's this hard rubber, probably harder than when I bought it because I've had it for so many years and it's actually quite hard. And then the other side has a textured, it's like a cotton strip that's attached to the back. So I also use aluminum oxide. You can see it's embedded in the creases of this surface of the rubber. You don't need much, just a little tiny bit. I've had this for years. It's just an Old Spice bottle that I put the aluminum oxide powder in. And you just work it into the surface of the strop. These are still for sale, by the way. You can find them on Amazon. So now what I do is I just take and I hold my tip flat and I do equal pulls along this strop. A little bit of powder left on it. Flip it over, polish. There's no oxide on this side. We're just polishing the tip to a nice shine. So that's how I clean up my tip. It's a very sharp tip. And it stays sharp by doing that occasional stropping. Now earlier, in my last video, I started talking about hand oils and how they can affect the outcome of your painting. So I'm putting on, this is a kit leather glove. It was a pair that I bought and it used at the Goodwill or a secondhand shop, and it has longer, actually it had even longer, it went up to the elbows and it had buttons. I cut off the buttons, and this is actually the inside. After using the left-handed one on and totally wearing that one out, I took the right-handed one, and I don't use it on my right hand, and turned it inside out, which made it a left-handed glove. So that's why you see these seams, is because it has been modified and it's inside out. Doesn't matter with the kit leather. The thing that matters is that I'm not transferring hand oils onto my bird's head. So the last time I was working on the top and back of the head, I'm going to check my temperature after I let it warm up a little bit. And you'll find if you do have residue on your wood burning tip, after you clean it off, you won't need as much heat, and it'll pull much easier through your wood. So I'm testing the heat, which seems pretty good. I'm doing short little strokes, so I'm going to turn it up just a little bit so that I can move faster. I think that'll work. If not, I'll make some adjustments. I'm really happy to have my camera working so well. I really would like the world to understand what goes into a decorative carving. You know, they say, oh yeah, I carved that all out of a piece of wood. And that is impressive. But saying that doesn't really show what goes into actually making it happen. So the wood burning process is the most arduous step. It's where you have to have the patience and the diligence to really do a good job and make it convincing. So this video, or the series of videos, is actually going to document the amount of wood burning that is required to achieve the look that people wonder, how did you do that? How do you make it so soft looking and velvet looking? Well, this is how. And only a few people I know that have that patience to burn like this, and they are rewarded in competition, popularity. But if you don't really understand what it took getting there, you can't appreciate the price that's being asked. Hours and hours just in the loom with chicks alone was probably, that was 9 months of my life put into that piece. And that's pretty much 8 hours a day, 5 to 6 days a week. And it's beautiful to look at, but you'll only understand what it took to get there with a video like this. It documents it. I think if more carvers were to document their processes, there'd be a greater understanding. Maybe the popularity of our art would prosper as well. each of these strokes is I'm starting to get back to the individual feather clumps that are going to be in the back of the head, and thinking of their contour as I burn the barbs into the feather clumps. You know, the first pass, the goal is to just lay in and break up the surface according to what was textured and carved. So once we get this first pass done, we'll be able to go back. I'll be able to go back and do some fancy feather splits and pay a little bit more attention to the detail. It may look like I'm skipping over things that should be done, and you're right, but not yet. I'll do them after I do my first pass. Still, I'm working evenly from side to side. St. Patrick's Day today, 2018. On a loon head, I don't do any texturing on the surface of the wood, except for on the crest if it's going to be raised a little bit, like they'll do if they're getting excited. Did a lot of this type of carving and wood burning on the Madagascar greaves, and it's actually pretty fun wood burning all of this texture and really enhancing what I've done with my carving and then texturing and now the wood burning. It's all, you know, just part of the steps. It'll get interesting when I work on the breast and underneath the bill. I'll have to be tricky about how I reach in there. I'll have to switch over to my spear tip because it has a blade on both sides. It can be used up and down a lot easier with the tip in the center of the blade. And it will allow me to get into some of these areas that are going to be tough. And when you get into an area that you can't reach in your normal position where I'm pulling through, you have to start thinking a little bit different. You have to think sometimes upside down and backwards in the way you're going to take the stroke with the blade and trying to get into an area that's not reachable otherwise. Sometimes I find myself getting my tip stuck in the same burn line. Sometimes it's the grain that's kind of trying to take over. Now as I move back on the head, I'm getting onto end grain. And that might burn a little faster, a little hotter. I may have to turn this down a little bit soon as I get back here. You can also use, I've tried using the cotton gloves that you would handle film with, but they have too much lint and it gets stuck in the detail. Little, so they have all these little fuzzies that are left behind, and that just drives me nuts. So, and for you guys to go and find opera gloves at, and I'm talking to the men here, isn't going to be practical. These are like evening gloves that women use when they're going out to a very fancy event, and I'm just finding them at secondhand stores. I'm not going to use them for that. I'm just using them for my art here, and I'm not sure what could be substituted for guys. I suppose you could put band-aids on your fingers. These opera gloves are not always kit glove leather. It's or suede. It's quite often they're polyester, and so maybe you can find a polyester glove. I think men have, and it's not just oil, sweaty palms. There's dirt that we have on our hands that we don't see, but continually, it's not much, but continually picking the bird up in the same place will transfer that dirt. And it's just something that I'm sure the paint is fighting when you get to the painting, so better not to have it there and try to deal with the difference that it might make in the absorption or the coloration. You know, the color, when you're painting in oils, you're letting the paint absorb into the surface of the burned feathers and texture. And the actual color of the wood plays a part, or can play a part if you're not diligent in realizing that there's a yellow cast or a that's been added because the paint is not opaque. So the color of the wood still shows through, and that can work for you, but it can also work against you. And to be sure and get good coverage if it's affecting the color that you're trying to achieve, or at least compensate for that potential and different color that, I always have a white background on my palettes, because when, say if you're mixing on a red plate, a red plastic plate is your palette, and you're not going to see the colors the same way as you would if you were using a white plate. I always have this white tagboard surface, because it's the wood can cast a different color to my pieces as I'm painting, and I want it to be as close to the real deal as possible. So I've just learned to use a white background so that I'm consistent in my colorations and things aren't being affected by the color of the area behind my palette. I use a glass plate, pie plate as my palette when I paint in oils. And so when I set that down on this white piece of tagboard underneath, I'm getting the true color showing through as I mix with my palette knife. And in acrylic painting, I use either a white plastic plate, or I use the Masterson Stay Wet palette, which has white paper inserts that are dampened with water and heated up in the microwave. And